Hello students, welcome back to part 2 of developmental disturbances of oral cavity. So today we are going to learn in detail about developmental disturbances, other developmental disturbances which are seen in oral mucosa as well as developmental disturbances that affects the tooth. Okay, so listen carefully. So first one, developmental disturbance of oral mucosa. Coming on to first one, pigmented cellular nevus. So what are nevus? Nevus cells are actually the abnormal melanocytes. So you know what is melanocytes? Melanocytes are the cells which are providing color to our skin. Okay, so it depends upon the number of the melanocytes. They produce the melanin. Okay, and this melanin is imparting color to the skin. So some people are very white in color, but some are brownish, but some are blackish. Okay, so this color difference is mainly because of the amount of melanin produced by the melanocytes. So what are the nevus cells? Nevus cells are actually abnormal melanocytes. Okay, so on the basis of the presence of nevus cells, based on the presence of the nevus cells, where it is present, okay, within the epithelium or within the connective tissue, based on that it is divided into junctional nevus, compound nevus and intradermal nevus. Okay, so what is, as you know, I hope everybody knows about the composition of the epithelium and the connective tissue. So above we have the epithelium and below we have the connective tissue. So epithelium itself will be having different layers: basal layer, stratum spinosum layer, okay, stratum basale, stratum spinosum, stratum corneum. So the layers of epithelium, as well as down you have the connective tissue. So connective tissue, in deeper layers you will have the blood vessels and the muscle layers. Okay, so that is the basic structure. So where these nevus cells are present, whether they are present within the epithelium or within the connective tissue, or whether within the epithelium, whether they are present in the basal layer of the epithelium, depending upon that we can divide the nevus, okay, cellular nevus, into three types: junctional nevus, compound nevus and intradermal nevus. So what is junctional nevus? Junctional nevus is the nevus cells are limited to the basal layer. Okay, I will show you the picture. Okay, before that the nevus cells are limited only to the basal layer, and that is junctional nevus. Second type is compound nevus. Compound nevus means it is present both in the epithelium as well as in the connective tissue. Epidermis means epithelium and down dermis means connective tissue. And last one, intradermal. Intradermal means what? Within the connective tissue, only within the connective tissue, not present in the epithelium. So those nevus are called intradermal nevus, within the connective tissue. So what is our common mole? Okay, common mole is actually the intradermal nevus. Okay, so what is common mole? It is a intradermal nevus, is otherwise known as common mole. Okay, so now what is junctional nevus significance in our MCQ viewpoint? Junctional nevus, in that particular case, nevus cells are present only in the basal layer, okay, basal layer of the epithelium. They have high chance of transforming to malignant melanoma. Okay, so then among the nevus, three different types of nevus, the highest chance for transformation into a malignant disease, okay, a malignant disease, that is malignant melanoma, is actually junctional nevus. So junctional nevus transforms into what? Malignant melanoma. So note that point, it is very important. And what is common mole? Common mole is actually intradermal nevus, where the nevus cells are present only within the connective tissue. Now see the picture carefully. Junctional nevus, there you can see very clearly. See the arrow point, okay, and the yellow marking I have given label. The nevus cells are found only along the basal cell layer of the epithelium. So that is epithelium, as well as down you have the connective tissue. So within the epithelium, the basal layer, okay, in that basal layer you can see brown color pigmentation, that is nevus cells. Okay, so these nevus cells are providing brownish color, they will be present as brownish color. So those nevus cells are present only along the basal layer. So that particular appearance is called abstrophan or dropping off effect, because they are present only in the basal layer. Okay, so that is known as abstrophan or dropping off effect. Clear everybody? Now coming on to compound nevus. In compound nevus you have, as I told you, the nevus cells will be present both in the epithelium as well as in the connective tissue. Now see the arrow point. See, then those brown color pigment cells are called nevus cells. They are present both in the epithelium, the first arrow. Secondly, you can see the arrow in the connective tissue. So when they are present in both layers, it is called compound nevus. Now the last one, intradermal nevus. So in that picture only a small part of the epithelium is shown and rest everything is connective tissue. So the nevus cells, okay, see the arrow point, the nevus cells are present only within the connective tissue. So that is our common mole, that is intradermal nevus. Okay, clear? So junctional nevus, compound nevus and intradermal nevus. And junctional nevus is the one which transforms into malignant melanoma, that is very important, and intradermal nevus is the one which we call commonly known as common mole. Now we have to study a few important other variants of nevus also. So another common type of, the most common mucosal type is intramucosal nevus. And what is the second most common type? The second most common type of nevus is blue nevus. It's a type of nevus. Okay, blue nevus. We needn't go in detail because it is a PG syllabus. So just remember the second most common type of nevus is blue nevus. Okay. Now the nevi of the skin are of two types. Actually, they are small, around 3 to 5 centimeter, or they can be either greater than 10 centimeter in diameter. Now, which is the nevus which is commonly seen in children? Okay, if it is being asked like that, it is Spitz nevus. Okay, so just learn that point. The nevus which is commonly seen in children is Spitz nevus. Okay, very important. Just remember it is Spitz nevus, and the common location for nevus is actually hard palate. Okay, if you're being asked, options are given like hard palate, oral mucosa, tongue, palate. So then the correct answer is hard palate. Okay, oral nevi are most commonly seen on the hard palate. Now see this picture. This picture is actually BK mole syndrome. So in BK mole syndrome, you can see large pigmented nevi on the skin surface, so which can transform into malignant melanoma. So this is a classical picture of a BK mole syndrome patient. The patient is having multiple nevi on the skin surface, okay, on the back. So these can transform into what? The BK mole syndrome can transform into malignant melanoma. Now let me show you what is a labial and oral melanotic macule. So these are actually single or multiple. So in that picture I am showing what a single melanotic macule. Okay, they are flat, brown, blackish in color, asymptomatic, and they can be either in the midline or 5 centimeter or less in diameter also. Okay. Now these are the pictures of various oral melanotic macules. Just see in the first picture you can see the mole which is being seen in the macule is in the gingival area, okay, intergingival area. The second one in the buccal mucosa, and the last one in the hard palate. So the most common site for a oral nevi is what? Hard palate. Now listen carefully, an important MCQ question is Peutz-Jeghers syndrome. Okay, so what is Peutz-Jeghers syndrome? It's otherwise known as intestinal polyposis with melanin pigmentation. Okay, so it is actually hereditary intestinal polyposis syndrome, or Peutz-Jeghers syndrome is actually, you can see pigmentation, melanin pigmentation, which can be seen on the lips, also on the skin surface. Okay, plus along with that you can see intestinal polyps. Okay, in the next coming slide I will show you what is an intestinal polyp. So this Peutz-Jeghers syndrome is actually a autosomal dominant disease. Okay, and it is due to a mutation of STK2, okay, serine 309 kinase 2. Okay, so remember that Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, otherwise known as hereditary intestinal polyposis syndrome, there you can see melanin pigmentation. So see the pictures, you can see melanin pigmentation concentrated on the lips. Okay, lower lip you can see the surface of the foot you can see, as well as on the palms also. Okay, so you can see pigmentation along with that intestinal polyps. Okay, it's seen in the Peutz-Jeghers syndrome. So here there is germline mutation of STK2. Now this is the picture of intestinal polyps, okay, in a Peutz-Jeghers syndrome. So see the first and the second picture. So what is the importance of this intestinal polyps? These intestinal polyps can undergo a malignant change and can lead to a gastrointestinal carcinoma. Okay, so that is an important point. So the intestinal polyps in a Peutz-Jeghers syndrome can transform into what? What type of carcinoma? Gastrointestinal carcinoma. Coming on to Fordyce granules. So what are Fordyce granules? A commonly asked MCQ question. Even it can be asked as a picture oriented question. So note the picture. So you can see yellowish spots. Okay, yellowish spots on the buccal mucosa. So these yellowish spots are actually ectopic collections of sebaceous glands. So actually they are ectopic collections of sebaceous glands. They are not supposed to be in that area. So they are ectopic collections of sebaceous glands. These are known as Fordyce granules, otherwise known as Fordyce disease also. It can also be called as Fordyce disease or Fordyce granules. They appear as what? Small yellow spots at various sites in the oral cavity. Coming on to Hicks disease. So this is the last one within the oral mucosa, the developmental disturbance. Hicks disease is very, very important, otherwise known as focal epithelial hyperplasia. Okay, so focal epithelial hyperplasia or Hicks disease is actually a viral infection. It is caused by human papilloma virus. Okay, it is a viral infection, HPV 13 and 32. So it is caused by human papilloma virus 13 and 32. So that is very important. I have given in red. Okay, so HPV 13 and 32, and it is primarily seen in where? In adults or children. It is primarily seen in children. So what is the appearance within the oral mucosa? If you have a Hicks disease, the appearance will be like a cobblestone appearance. So the right picture, the first one shows the cobblestone. What is a cobblestone? Similar arrangement you can see within the buccal mucosa. So that is a clinical picture. So there is a similarity in appearance along with that of a cobblestone. So that is why it is called as a cobblestone appearance. The lesion is arranged like a cobblestone. Okay, so that is Hicks disease. Hicks disease, focal epithelial hyperplasia. It is caused by viral infection, HPV induced HPV 13 and 32, primarily seen in children, and it have a cobblestone appearance. So next let's learn about developmental disturbances affecting the gingiva. Coming on to first one, that is fibromatosis gingivae. In MCQ viewpoint, it is not that important, but just note down the clinical picture. How does it look like? You can see elephantiasis type of gingiva, isn't it? So it is otherwise called as elephantiasis gingivae, and it is a hereditary disorder. It is an autosomal dominant hereditary disorder. Okay, so here you can see the gingival enlargement. Okay, and it is affecting appearing about the time of eruption of permanent incisor. You can note this particular changes. Okay, so it is a fibromatosis gingivae clinical picture. Coming on to the next one, retrocuspid papilla. This is a MCQ important question. Okay, retrocuspid papilla. Note down the clinical picture. Retrocuspid papilla. You can see the arrow mark. Okay, it is a small lingual to mandibular canine, you can see. Okay, it is always bilateral. Mostly they are bilateral. Commonly they are bilateral. Retrocuspid papillae are mostly seen in children, and it is always seen as bilateral. And they are also, what is the location? Lingual to mandibular canine. They are mostly seen lingual to mandibular canine. So just note down the picture, relate and study. Okay, so retrocuspid papilla, they are small mucosal nodules which is commonly bilateral, and they are seen often in children between the ages of 8 to 16 years, and they are seen, which is the location? Lingual to mandibular canine. Now after the developmental disturbances of gingiva, we are dealing with the disturbances of tongue. What is eglossia? Eglossia means what? What is agnathia? As I told you, it is a autosomal recessive disorder. I hope everyone remembers. In part 1 I had taught you. Okay, so what is eglossia? Eglossia is actually the tongue is completely absent in this particular case. You can see a small rudimentary tongue. Okay, so it is completely absent. Eglossia. What is microglossia? Microglossia means you see a very small rudimentary tongue. In eglossia, the tongue is almost absent, whereas in microglossia, you can see a small rudimentary tongue. And which is the syndrome associated with? That is an important question. Okay, so in microglossia is often associated with oromandibular limb hypogenesis syndrome. So from that particular term itself, it is very clear. It is hypogenesis, which means all the structures are underdeveloped. Okay, oromandibular limb hypogenesis syndrome. So it is associated with microglossia. Coming on to macroglossia. In case of macroglossia, what do you see? A large tongue. Okay, abnormally large tongue. Okay, so what are the syndromes? Syndromes which you can see macroglossia. So macroglossia can be either congenital or it can be secondary also. Okay, by birth the tongue must be a very big tongue. Okay, so macroglossia, what are the syndromes? Very important syndromes which are commonly asked in MCQs are neurofibromatosis, acromegaly and cretinism. Okay, so in these syndrome the tongue is relatively larger in size. So macroglossia is often, so these are the options which are commonly seen in MCQs. Neurofibromatosis can be seen, acromegaly, cretinism. Okay, so these are the secondary structures, okay, secondary features of macroglossia. So what happens when you have an abnormally large tongue? When you have a large tongue, what happens? There will be scalloping, okay, scalloping of the lateral border of the tongue, okay. So the tips of the scallops will be fitting into the interproximal space between the teeth. So between the teeth, the tongue will be finding it very difficult to adjust in between the teeth, okay. So you can see small scallops you can see within the lateral borders of the tongue, okay. So the syndromes which are commonly seen, macroglossia associated syndromes, are very important in MCQ viewpoint. These are Down syndrome as well as Beckwith-Whitman syndrome, okay. So which are the syndromes? Down syndrome and Beckwith-Whitman syndrome. The conditions are neurofibromatosis, acromegaly and cretinism, and the syndromes associated are Down syndrome and Beckwith-Whitman syndrome. So what are the other features of Beckwith-Whitman syndrome? That is also very important, okay. Macroglossia you can see in Beckwith-Whitman syndrome, neonatal hypoglycemia, mild microcephaly, unilateral hernia you can see, fetal visceromegaly and postnatal somatic gigantism. So these are the features of Beckwith-Whitman syndrome. So the most important feature in that is macroglossia. So the two conditions associated with macroglossia are Down syndrome and Beckwith-Whitman syndrome. Coming on to ankyloglossia or tongue tie, okay, these two terms are very important. Ankyloglossia is otherwise known as what? Tongue tie. So you see the picture, in picture you can see there is a attachment of the tongue to that of the frenum, okay. So it can be a complete ankyloglossia or it can be a partial one. So complete means what? There is fusion between the tongue and the floor of the mouth, okay. The entire tongue and the floor of the mouth is fused in that particular case. Whereas in case of partial ankyloglossia or tongue tie, there will be a short lingual frenum and there will be an attachment to the tip of the frenum, okay. So that is a difference. So what is ankyloglossia? Means tongue tie. Coming on to clefting of tongue, okay, cleft tongue or bifid tongue. So these terms are very confusing and it will be directly asked like that only within the MCQ. So options will be like cleft tongue or bifid tongue can be seen. So bifid tongue means what? See the picture. You can see a small deep groove in the midline of the dorsal surface, isn't it? So it is most commonly associated with which syndrome? Orofacial digital syndrome. Bifid tongue is mostly associated with which syndrome? Orofacial digital syndrome. So what is the clinical significance? There will be a partial clefting of the tongue and within the cleft you can see collection of food debris, okay, and because of the collection of food debris you can see the irritation will be there as well as microorganism growth will be there, okay, and infection will happen, okay. So that is cleft tongue or bifid tongue seen in orofacial digital syndrome. Coming on to fissured tongue. See the picture, fissures you can see, yeah, it's very clear, isn't it? So the fissured tongue is otherwise known as scrotal tongue. So don't get confused. Fissured tongue is otherwise known as scrotal tongue, okay, note down that point, okay. Scrotal tongue, the in MCQ with other than fissured tongue, indirectly it can be, the option can be scrotal tongue also. So the scrotal tongue is associated with other conditions like geographic tongue also can be associated with, or Down syndrome or Melkersson-Rosenthal syndrome also. Okay, so in Melkersson-Rosenthal syndrome, I had told you one important feature was fissured tongue. Okay, I had taught in the part 1 developmental disturbance. If you haven't revised, if you don't remember, revise the lecture once more. Okay, so in that I had shown two pictures. In that I had shown a lady with the fissured tongue, okay, in case of Melkersson-Rosenthal syndrome. So connect, same thing is here also, okay. In Melkersson-Rosenthal syndrome you can see fissured tongue or scrotal tongue, okay. So the same clinical significance. In case of bifid tongue you had the same collection of food debris and microorganism and irritation. Same thing happens here also. Clinically the patient will be having difficulty because of the collection of food debris in these fissures and the growth of microorganism and irritation, okay. So remember, fissured tongue is otherwise known as scrotal tongue and the associated conditions are geographic tongue, Down syndrome and Melkersson-Rosenthal syndrome. Coming on to hairy tongue. So hairy tongue, it's very clear, very important MCQ. Which is the papillae which is growth happens in case of hairy tongue? Which papillae is overgrown? It is filiform papillae. Okay, a very important question routinely asked. So hairy tongue, there is hypertrophy, not hyperplasia. Hypertrophy and hyperplasia is both are different terms. Okay, hypertrophy is different, hyperplasia is different. Okay, hypertrophy, here there is increase Okay, increase in size. Okay, hypertrophy. Hyperplasia means increase in number. So both are different. Hypertrophy means increase in size. So hypertrophy of the filiform papillae of the tongue. So the options can be it can be what is a hairy tongue. Okay, hairy tongue is option A can be hyperplasia of the filiform papillae. Option B will be hypertrophy of the filiform papillae. So you should not get confused. Okay, so option B will be correct. It is hypertrophy, not hyperplasia. Okay, note down that point. Hairy tongue is actually hypertrophy, increase in size of filiform papillae of the tongue. Okay, clear? Coming on to next important topic, that is median rhomboid glossitis. Now look into the picture. The picture is very important because the picture can be asked as a image based question also. So in that you can see in the centermost part of the tongue you can see a rhomboid figure. Okay, a rhomboid depapillated figure. You can see central papillary atrophy of the tongue is seen. Okay, so that is median rhomboid glossitis. It is actually what, due to the failure of tuberculum impar to retract or withdraw before the fusion of lateral halves of the tongue. So as the tongue fuses, during the development of the tongue, as the tongue fuses, okay, there is failure of the two lateral halves of the tongue. As it fuses, there should be the failure of tuberculum impar to retract or withdraw happens. Okay, so when this doesn't happen, it results in a depapillated central portion, okay, which is diamond or rhomboid shape, which is less than 2 centimeter in size. Okay, so and that is actually seen on the dorsal surface of the tongue immediately anterior to circumvallate papillae. Okay, it will be just anterior, okay, not posterior. So that can also be an option. The location of median rhomboid glossitis, it is actually anterior to circumvallate papillae on the dorsal surface of the tongue. Okay, now a similar lesion you can see in the soft palate. Okay, because this particular area is depapillated, there can be infection in this particular area, so the tongue will be frequently contacting the soft palate. Okay, so the same location, the adjacent, the opposite location in soft palate will be having an infection in this particular case, which is called as a kissing lesion. Okay, the contact of the tongue to the soft palate in that particular area of the soft palate will be, there will be an infection which is called as kissing lesion. This particular lesion is called as kissing lesion. Okay, because of the frequent touch from the tongue to the soft palate in that particular area alone. So it is called as kissing lesion. Okay, it is seen in median rhomboid glossitis. Clear everybody? So it is due to failure of the tuberculum impar to retract or withdraw before the fusion of two halves of the tongue. Okay, it is seen anterior to the circumvallate papillae, another important point. And the similar lesion when you see in the soft palate, it is actually what? Kissing lesion. Okay, median rhomboid glossitis. Now what is benign migratory glossitis? So the picture you can see, it is like a geographic area, isn't it? So it is like a globe, a geographic areas you see in a globe. So it is called as a geographic tongue or wandering rash of the tongue. So it is because of multiple areas you can see desquamation of filiform papillae. So that point is very important. Which papillae is desquamated in case of median rhomboid? In case of benign migratory glossitis, it is filiform papillae. Okay, so it is otherwise known as migratory glossitis. So there will be desquamation in one particular area for a short time, then it will shift to another location, and the previous location will be healing. Okay, and then from that particular second location it will be moving on to third location, and the second location will be healing. So it keeps on moving from one place to another. Okay, it is not like a just like median rhomboid glossitis. In case of median rhomboid glossitis, it was fixed to the centermost portion. Okay, so it was fixed to centermost portion, but in here in benign migratory glossitis, it keeps on changing from one place to another. So that is why it is called as geographic tongue or wandering rash of the tongue or migratory glossitis. Okay, note the clinical picture, very important. Now histologically, this benign migratory glossitis is little important. Okay, why? Because if you take a section of this geographic tongue, okay, if you take a section of this migratory glossitis or a geographic tongue, and if you see under microscope, what you can see? You can see a parakeratin layer, and underneath you can see the epithelium. So in the centermost portion, can you see a whitish area devoid of cells? So that is actually intraepithelial abscesses, small abscesses or swellings. Okay, so this intraepithelial microabscess formation is called as Monro's abscess. It is seen exclusively in geographic tongue. Okay, so the intraepithelial microabscess formation which is seen in case of a geographic tongue is known as Monro's abscess. So note that point. Okay. Now what is lingual varices? Lingual varices, see dilated veins you can see beneath the ventral surface of the tongue. So in the mostly seen in the ventral surface of the tongue, you can see what dilated veins you can see. So this is because of the increased hydrostatic pressure, okay, and poorly supported surrounding tissue. The surrounding tissue will be very less, but the veins will be very larger in size, okay, so and dilated also because of the increased pressure within it, hydrostatic pressure. Okay, so these are known as lingual varices. MCQ viewpoint, it is not that important, but note down the clinical picture. It can be asked as an image based question also. Coming on to next one, lingual thyroid nodule. Okay, so what is a lingual thyroid nodule? It is a asymptomatic. So can you see a reddish swelling next to that of the tonsil area? So that is actually a lingual thyroid. Okay, so it is benign enlargement of the lingual thyroid tissue. So it is asymptomatic and deeply situated nodular mass, mostly seen in the base of the tongue near the foramen cecum. You can see often in the midline around 2 to centimeter in diameter. So that particular location you note down, lingual thyroid nodule is seen mostly. It is actually enlargement of lingual thyroid tissue seen next to base of the tongue, okay, near the foramen cecum. Now let's move on to developmental disturbances of the salivary gland. So only one lesion we have to learn in case of salivary gland defect, okay, developmental defect, that is Staphney defect or Staphney cyst, but it is very very important, okay. So note down, so listen carefully, what is a Staphney defect or cyst? It is actually during the development, so during the development, embryological development of the salivary gland tissue, a small portion of the salivary gland tissue gets embedded within the mandible, okay, during the embryonic development. So this particular salivary gland tissue within the mandible is, when we take a radiograph, routine radiograph, we can find it in the radiograph, which is known as Staphney defect or a cyst. So what is the location of the Staphney defect? That is very important, MCQ viewpoint. The location is actually between the mandibular canal. So as you know, in the mandible you can see mandibular canal and inferior border of the mandible. So in between these two you can mostly see this Staphney cyst or Staphney defect. It is not seen in everyone. It is seen only in case of developmental disturbances, okay, in between the second and third molar area, just anterior to the angle of the mandible, you can see between that of a mandibular canal and the inferior border of the mandible, you can see this particular radiolucency. It is seen as a radiolucency, black in color. So see the radiographic picture, it is a radiolucency and it is seen between the mandibular canal and the inferior border of the mandible, okay, in the second and third molar area, just anterior to the angle of the mandible. Okay, clear? So why does it happen? It is just because during the development of salivary gland tissue, a small portion of the salivary gland tissue is getting embedded within the mandible, okay, by some fault, okay, due to some disturbance in the development. Okay, so that is known as the Staphney defect or Staphney cyst. Very very important MCQ. Note down and note down the picture also, okay, radiographic picture also. This is otherwise known as static bone defect or Staphney cyst. Okay, clear? Now let's go to developmental disturbances in the case of teeth. Okay, so first one we are dealing with the size of the tooth. Okay, so what is microdontia? Microdontia is actually smaller tooth. Okay, so it can be two types. It can be true generalized microdontia, all the teeth are smaller than normal. It is mostly seen in pituitary dwarfism and Down syndrome. But it can also be relative microdontia, which means the tooth size will be actually normal, but you have a comparatively larger jaw. So the tooth size will relatively appear to be smaller in size. Okay, so these are the two types, true generalized microdontia and relative generalized microdontia. So which are the conditions you see a true generalized microdontia is seen in case of pituitary dwarfism and Down syndrome. Note down the picture. Okay, so here you see, what do you see? A microdontia, a relatively smaller tooth. The tooth can be a single tooth also can be affected. So in this case it is actually lateral incisor, maxillary lateral incisor, which is called as a pec lateral. Okay, pec lateral. So the most commonly involved microdontia is most commonly involved in case of which tooth? That can also be an MCQ question. It most commonly affects the maxillary lateral incisor, maxillary lateral incisor or pec lateral, it is called as pec lateral. Okay, so the most commonly affected tooth is maxillary lateral incisor. Coming on to next one, macrodontia. Macrodontia means what? A relatively larger tooth. So it is mostly seen in case of pituitary gigantism, okay? And a single tooth involvement can also be seen in case of facial hemihypertrophy. So these are the two important points you have to remember. So macrodontia is also similar like microdontia. You can see a true generalized macrodontia, relatively generalized macrodontia, and macrodontia involving a single tooth, okay? Coming on to developmental disturbances in shape of the tooth. So we dealt with size. In size, what did we study? We studied microdontia and macrodontia. Now, which is the tooth which is commonly microdontia is seen? It is maxillary lateral incisor. Now, coming on to shape of the tooth. Next one, gemination. Okay, when we look into the shape, gemination is very, very important MCQ question. So, what is gemination? Here, what happens is a twinning happens. From a single tooth germ, two teeth is developing into. Okay, so here you have two teeth is developing from a single tooth germ. So when you count the number of teeth, when you actually count the number of teeth, the tooth number will be one tooth excess. Okay, the tooth number will be one tooth excess. Okay, in that particular case, that is gemination. In case of a complete cleavage, sometimes the cleavage can be incomplete also. Okay, so gemination, there is the tooth germ is dividing into two different tooth. A single tooth germ is divided into two different tooth. So in that case, you can see a one tooth excess number. But if there is incomplete formation, the same number of tooth will be remaining. Okay, so just remember what is gemination: an attempt or a division of a single tooth germ by invagination into two different tooth. Okay, that is twinning. And when you count the actual number, you can see one tooth will be excess. Now, what is fusion? Fusion means what? It is actually opposite of gemination. So in case of gemination, one single tooth germ was dividing into two different tooth, isn't it? But here in case of fusion, what happens? Two different tooth germ is fusing into one single tooth. See the picture. In that picture, lateral incisor and canine. So the central incisor and lateral incisor. So both the tooth are fused into a single tooth, isn't it? So when you actually count the number of teeth in the oral cavity, one tooth will be less in number. Okay, so that point is very important. In case of gemination or twinning, what you can see, one tooth excess in number. But in case of fusion, when you count the number of tooth, one tooth number will be less than the normal number. Okay, so that is fusion. Okay, you have two normally separated tooth germ into a single large tooth. Now coming on to another important MCQ, that is concrescence. Okay, so in case of concrescence, what happens? Here the root portion is fused. Okay, so the fusion which occurs after root formation completed is called as through the cementum there is fusion. So see the picture, in picture you can clearly see the fusion of both the tooth is through the cementum only after the root formation. After the root formation, only the root formation is fused between the two tooth. Okay, that is concrescence. Okay, so what is the clinical significance? When you see clinically within the oral cavity of the patient, you cannot see this fusion, isn't it? Because crowns are not fused. But when you attempt an extraction of one tooth, what happens? It will result in the extraction of the other tooth also. Okay, so because if you don't take a radiograph, you don't understand whether they are fused or not. So in case of concrescence, that is the clinical implication. In clinically, you will not understand whether they are fused or not. So if you do attempt an extraction of one tooth, the other tooth also will go for an extraction. So just remember this point. In case of concrescence, the fusion which occurs after root formation is completed and they are united only by the cementum. Okay, understood? Now what is dilaceration? Very, very important MCQ. Okay, dilaceration means it is the sharp bend or curve in the root of a crown. So I hope everyone remembers this from the BDS syllabus. So dilaceration is actually sharp bend or curve in the root or crown. Okay, so note that point. Dilaceration is not just for the root, it can also affect the crown portion also. Okay, so see the first picture. The first picture shows dilaceration of the root. Okay, but second picture you see, it is actually the crown portion is there is a sharp bend. So dilaceration can be for both the root as well as for the crown also. So remember that point is very, very important for MCQ. It is a sharp bend or angulation or curve in the root or crown portion of a tooth. Coming on to talon's cusp. What is talon's cusp or eagle's talon? So other term is very important in this case. Talon's cusp is otherwise known as what? Eagle's talon, because it resembles the talon, the beak of the eagle. That is why it is called as a eagle's talon. So see the clinical picture, you can easily make out the eagle's talon. Okay, it is seen lingually from the cingulum area of maxillary or mandibular permanent incisor. In this case, it is a maxillary tooth. Okay, so in case of a lateral incisor, you can see the cingulum. Okay, lingually, projecting lingually from the cingulum area, it is projecting. It is similar to that of a eagle's beak. That is why it is called as eagle's talon or talon's cusp. Okay, so what does it contain? So this lingual portion, whether it contains enamel or dentine or whether it contains a pulp, that is an important question. It consists all the three different layers. It consists of enamel, dentine as well as a horn of pulp tissue. So that is very important. So in case of an eagle's talon, that talon portion consists of normal enamel, dentine and horn of pulp tissue also, and which is the associated syndrome. That is very important. Talon's cusp is associated with Rubinstein-Taybi syndrome. So just remember Taybi, talon. Okay, so TT. Okay, remember those two alphabets. Okay, Rubinstein-Taybi syndrome associated with talon's cusp. Okay, clear? Coming on to the next important question, that is dens invagination. Okay, dens invaginatus, which is otherwise known as radiographically a tooth within a tooth appearance. See the picture, tooth within a tooth appearance. If you take a radiograph, you will find out a tooth is seen within a tooth, isn't it? So that is dens invaginatus. They are mostly seen in the coronal portion. Okay, in the crown portion they are seen more commonly. They are actually invagination in the surface of the tooth crown before calcification due to increased or localized external pressure. So dens invaginatus are mostly, tooth within a tooth appearance are mostly seen in which tooth? That is a very important question. It is seen in permanent maxillary lateral incisor, commonly seen in permanent maxillary lateral incisor, and the second common tooth will be permanent maxillary central incisor. So these are two important tooth which you can see the dens invaginatus or tooth within a tooth appearance. So that picture you are getting permanent maxillary lateral incisor. Remember that point, tooth within a tooth appearance most commonly associated with permanent maxillary lateral incisor. Now this coronal invagination, the invagination which are seen in the crown portion, coronal invagination can be classified into three types. Now look into the picture. It can be type 1, type 2 and type 3. The first picture. Type 1 invagination is confined to the crown alone. Type 2, the invagination is extending below the cemento-enamel junction. Okay, and it may or may not communicate with the pulp portion. Okay, second picture, it is not communicating with the pulp. Okay, and third one is actually invagination extending to the apex of the root. Okay, till the root portion you can see the invagination without the communication with the pulp. So that is also an important MCQ. The type 3 coronal invagination, whether it is associated communication with the pulp or not. It is not communicating with the pulp. Okay, invagination extending to the apex of the root without communication with the pulp. And the second picture is showing radicular invagination. Okay, but it is rare. Okay, in that case is very rare. Actually, mostly coronal invagination is commonly seen. Coming on to dens invaginatus. Okay, dens invaginatus. That is very, very important question. Can you see in case of dens invagination, invagination was within the tooth within a tooth appearance. But here you can see what? An invagination is towards outside. You can see a occlusally, you can see a extra cusp like kind you can see. So that is known as a Lyon's premolar. When it is commonly seen in the premolar, it is called as Lyon's premolar. Okay, or occlusal enamel pearl also you can call them. Okay, so they appearing as a extra cusp or accessory cusp or a globule of enamel on the occlusal surface you can see between the buccal and lingual cusp of premolar. Okay, usually they are unilateral or they can be bilateral also. So that is dens invaginatus, otherwise known as what? Lyon's premolar. So note down, they are actually appearing as accessory cusp or secondary cusp. Okay, clear? Coming on to next important question, that is what? Taurodontism, bull-like teeth. The tooth will be actually very larger in size. Okay, and why does it happen? The taurodontism is because of the failure of Herdwick's epithelial root sheet to invaginate at the proper horizontal level. So when we learn about the development of the tooth, I will be dealing in detail about the invagination. Okay, so it is from the Herdwick epithelial root sheath that the root develops. Okay, after the crown development, the root development is from the Herdwick's epithelial root sheath, from the hers. So when there is failure in that, okay, when there is failure of this Herdwick epithelial root sheath to invaginate at proper horizontal level, what happens? You get a relatively larger tooth, and that larger tooth is similar to that of the tooth of a bull. So that is bull-like teeth. That is taurodontism. Okay. So which are the associated conditions you see a taurodontism type-like tooth? Okay, it is seen in case of amelogenesis imperfecta. Okay, which is seen in taurodontism type 4 is seen. Okay, that is hypertaurodont type of tooth is seen. Klinefelter syndrome and Down syndrome. So taurodontism can be of 4 different types. It can be either normal type, okay, and second one is hypotaurodont tooth, second type is mesotaurodont, and last one is hypertaurodont. In case of amelogenesis imperfecta, we are seeing this hypertaurodont type of taurodontism. Okay, so note down that point. Coming on to next important one, that is supernumerary roots. Here you see a extra root, isn't it? Mostly seen in case of mandibular, canine and premolars, or they can be seen in case of maxillary and mandibular third molars also. So the most commonly seen tooth is actually mandibular, canine and premolar. Enamel pearls, these are a very cute pics, isn't it? So enamel pearl is actually, they are actually what? Droplets of ectopic enamel. Droplets of ectopic enamel. So you can see in the picture, you can see it is due to differentiation of the ameloblast from the Herdwick's epithelial root sheath during root development. So actually it was supposed to be root development, but what happens, some of the cells of Herdwick's epithelial root sheath is differentiating, differentiation of this ameloblast happen and they deposit. Okay, so enamel deposits on the surface, and that is why it results in enamel pearl. Okay, droplets of ectopic enamel, mostly seen on the roots of the tooth. Now let's learn about developmental disturbances in number of the tooth. What is anodontia? Anodontia means there is congenital absence of the tooth. You don't have a tooth at all. Okay, so that is anodontia. Okay, it can be a total anodontia or a partial anodontia, but MCQ viewpoint is not that important. Okay, just know what is anodontia means, congenital absence of the tooth. Coming on to supernumerary tooth. Here you have a extra tooth. Okay, so look into the picture. The extra tooth, there is a development of the third tooth bud arising from the dental lamina near the permanent tooth bud. Okay, so what happens, the most commonly seen supernumerary tooth is actually mesiodens. So remember that point, mesiodens, you can see in the picture. Okay, what is mesiodens? Small cone shaped crown or small short root you can see between the maxillary central incisors. Okay, see the first picture, that boy is very cute smile, but in between he is having what? He is having mesiodens, an extra tooth. Okay, now after mesiodens, if you have an extra tooth which is distal to that of a third molar, it is called as a distomolar. Okay, or maxillary fourth molar. So now the second one, next type is actually paramolars. What is paramolar? When the same extra tooth is present either buccally or lingually, it is called as a paramolar. So in that picture it is actually a paramolar. Okay, so distomolar means what? It is situated distal to the third molar, and case of paramolar means extra tooth will be present either buccal or lingual to the top of the molar. Okay, so in that picture you can see a paramolar. So the most commonly appearing supernumerary tooth is actually mesiodens, and they are actually conical in size and they are small peck shaped. Okay, clear? Now another important MCQ is actually multiple impacted supernumerary tooth. So in which condition you see impacted supernumerary tooth is associated with cleidocranial dysplasia and Gardner syndrome. Those 2 points are very important. So multiple impacted. So see that radiograph. That radiograph is actually radiograph of a patient with Gardner syndrome. Okay, so you can see in that radiograph multiple impacted supernumerary tooth. Okay, within the jaw you can see mandible jaw and maxillary jaw, several unerupted supernumerary tooth are present. So it is seen in case of cleidocranial dysplasia and Gardner syndrome. Now let's learn about 2 important MCQ. What is a natal tooth and what is a neonatal tooth? So see the child with a small tooth in the mandible. Okay, so it is not deciduous tooth. Okay, by birth at the same time, at the time of birth, if the baby is having a tooth, then it is called as a natal tooth. Okay, the teeth which is present in the newborn is called as, at this time of birth, it is called as natal tooth. But after birth, within first 30 days, if it is erupting, it is called as neonatal tooth. So just remember the points. What is a natal tooth and what is a neonatal tooth? Natal tooth is the one which is present at the time of birth. Okay, as the child birth, during that time itself, the baby's mouth, there will be an extra tooth will be present. Okay, but what is a neonatal tooth? After the birth, within first 30 days, okay, within that first month, if there is an eruption of a tooth, it is called as a neonatal tooth. So there is a difference between a natal and neonatal tooth. Very, very important MCQ. Okay, now let's move on to one important topic, that is developmental disturbance in structure of the teeth. Okay, very, very important MCQ. So important one, that is amelogenesis imperfecta. What is amelogenesis imperfecta? It is otherwise known as a group of hereditary disorders associated with that of enamel actually. So ameloblasts are the cells which are supposed to form the proper enamel. So when there is a defect in this ameloblast, it results in the defect in enamel formation. So what are the 5 genes which are causing this defect? The 5 genes affected or mutated are MLX gene, ENAM gene, MMP20, KLK4 and DLX3. So very important MCQ. The 5 genes involved in amelogenesis imperfecta are MLX, ENAM, MMP20, KLK4 and DX3 gene. So we have generally 3 types of amelogenesis imperfecta. Very important. First type is hypoplastic type of amelogenesis imperfecta. Second one hypomaturative type, and last one hypocalcified type. So what does a hypoplastic means? Hypoplastic is actually defect in the formation of enamel matrix. Hypomaturation means there will be a defect in the maturation stage. Okay, enamel crystallizes, remain immature. And last one, hypocalcified, means there is a defect in the mineralization stage. So these are the 3 different types of amelogenesis imperfecta. Hypoplastic type, there is a defect in the formation of the matrix formation of enamel. Secondly, you don't have the maturing doesn't happen, so you have an immature enamel matrix. And lastly, the calcification doesn't happen. So these are the different stages, and when there is a defect in these different stages, you result in 3 different types of amelogenesis imperfecta. Okay. So in that last slide, I had shown you hypoplastic type of, okay, hypoplastic type of amelogenesis imperfecta. You can see a small pits, okay, small pits on the enamel surface. Whereas coming on to hypomaturative type, in case of hypomaturative, the surface, you see the picture, the surface enamel is molted, okay, and you can see opaque white, brown, yellow discoloration you can see. Okay, this is the appearance of a hypomaturative type of enamel defect. When you move on to hypocalcified type of amelogenesis imperfecta, the enamel which is formed, it doesn't undergo calcification. So the enamel will be very soft and friable. Okay. So on eruption, you can see what yellow, brown or orange color appearance. So see the clinical picture, it is yellowish brown coloration. Actually the tooth has been formed, but the calcification has not happened. Okay. Now let's learn about environmental enamel hypoplasia. So here in this particular case, enamel hypoplasia is because of the influence of the environment, the surrounding. So the first one is defect in the nutrition. So nutritional deficiency, it can be either vitamin D deficiency, okay, or it can be vitamin A and C deficiency also. And secondly, it can be either due to some diseases also. During pregnancy, if the mother is being affected with some kind of diseases, it can affect it affect as developmental disturbance in the tooth surface of the developing newborn. Okay, so the diseases can be measles, chickenpox, scarlet fever, etc. So that is environmental enamel hypoplasia. It is not that important, but just note down, you should have an awareness about what are the environmental enamel hypoplasia types. Okay, nutritional type and exanthematous diseases type. Okay. Now coming on to congenital syphilis. Okay, so this is also an environmental influenced type of enamel defect. So this is very important MCQ. Okay, so remember, congenital syphilis affects the tooth as what? Maxillary and mandibular permanent incisors are affected as Hutchinson's teeth. Okay, so the teeth will be what? A screwdriver shaped. So see the first picture, see the arrow mark, the tooth, the central incisor is actually a screwdriver shaped. Okay, so you can see a tapering and notching of the incisal edge, you can see in that picture. Okay, and absence of central tubercles or calcification center is present in that particular case. So that is congenital syphilis affecting the incisor. But when you look into the molar part, okay, when you come into the posterior tooth molar, the congenital syphilis affects as Moon's molar, or otherwise known as Fournier's molars or Mulberry molars. So the molars will be very irregular, crown will be present, and mainly enamel of the occlusal third of the tooth is very irregular. Okay, so along with that, you can see if you see a Hutchinson's triad, what is Hutchinson's triad? Along with Hutchinson's teeth, you can see eighth nerve deafness and interstitial keratosis. Okay, when these three features combine together, it is called as a Hutchinson's triad. Okay, congenital syphilis is actually resulting in Hutchinson's teeth, which is affecting central incisor, incisors as well as the posterior tooth. Incisors are affected as what? Screwdriver shaped, and they are called as screwdriver shaped Hutchinson's teeth. Okay, and molars will be affected as what? They are called as Moon's molars or Fournier's molars or Mulberry molars. So when this particular features combine with other two features like eighth nerve deafness and interstitial keratosis, becomes a Hutchinson's triad. So what is a Hutchinson's triad? Eighth nerve deafness, interstitial keratosis and Hutchinson's teeth. Okay, remember these three important points. It is very important MCQ. Coming on to another important hypocalcemia, birth injuries and erythroblastosis fetalis. Okay, so among this, as you know, when there is a decrease in the calcium level, so below 6 to 8 milligrams, when there is a decrease in the calcium level, it results in tetany. Okay, so this also shows as mild pitting on the enamel surface when the calcium level decreases. And next is birth injuries. So birth injuries can be seen as a neonatal line or a ring, which is seen as a change in the environment at the time of birth of a deciduous tooth or a permanent molar. And the last one is erythroblastosis fetalis. So what is this? This is actually seen as a ring-like defect on the incisal edges of the anterior deciduous teeth and middle portion of crown of a deciduous canine and a first molar. It is otherwise known as a arch hump. Okay. So erythroblastosis fetalis is otherwise called as, in case of a tooth defect, it is called as arch hump. Okay, seen as a ring-like defect on the incisal edges of the anterior deciduous teeth and middle portion of crown of deciduous canine and first molar. And the last one is local infection and trauma. So the local infection and trauma means what? A single tooth is affected here. Okay, so the permanent maxillary incisor or a maxillary mandibular premolar. So when there is an infection, it results in when the deciduous tooth is affected, it affects the permanent tooth also. So it is Turner's hypoplasia. It is called as Turner's hypoplasia. So it is seen as brownish discoloration of the enamel. Severe pitting and irregularity of tooth surface can be seen. So when there is a carious deciduous tooth, what happens? The infection spreads to the periapical area. So this will disturb the amyloblast layer of the developing permanent tooth germ and finally results in enamel hypoplasia of a single tooth. Okay, it is known as Turner's hypoplasia. Okay, clear everyone? So when there is a trauma to deciduous tooth, it is driven into the alveolus and disturb the permanent tooth, but it is called as Turner's hypoplasia. And the last one is fluorosis in this particular kind, that is environmental influenced enamel hypoplasia. In that last one is fluorosis. So the fluorosis, the tooth surface is called as molted enamel. Okay, molted enamel or molted tooth. Okay, so what happens in case of fluorosis, as you all know, the normal fluoride content of drinking water, if it is more than 1 ppm, okay, 1 parts per million, if the level is above this, it results in a molted enamel during the tooth development. Okay, so this will impart disturbance to the ameloblast. Okay, so it will be appearing as mild changes to larger changes. Mild changes will be white opaque areas involving more of the tooth surface, and then it will be leading to that of larger pitting also. Okay, so fluorosis is known as molted enamel. It is because when the drinking water level is having fluoride content more than required amount, more than 1 parts per million. Now this picture is showing actually moderate changes. So the first one was mild changes of fluorosis. Secondly, moderate changes. Moderately, if you have fluorosis, it will be like showing as pitting and brown staining of the tooth. But severe changes of fluorosis will be like third picture. Okay, second picture. It is corroded appearance of tooth you can see, as well as you can see tendency for fracture of the tooth. Okay, so the first picture I showed you the mild forms of opaque areas of fluorosis, molted enamel. Second picture, this one is showing actually in this slide, the first picture is showing what? Moderate changes, and the second picture in this slide is showing severe changes. Okay, so how do you treat fluorosis? That is also very important. Mostly the treatment is bleaching is done with hydrogen peroxide. Periodically we have to do this bleaching with hydrogen peroxide has to be done. Okay, to improve it aesthetically. So next we are going to deal about dentinogenesis imperfecta, so otherwise known as hereditary opalescent dentine. It's a very important MCQ. The other term of dentinogenesis imperfecta is what? Hereditary opalescent dentine. Coming on to the classification, shield classification, there are 3 types of dentinogenesis imperfecta. Type 1 is primarily affecting the primary tooth. Okay, deciduous tooth is commonly affected than the permanent tooth. Type 2 is also autosomal dominant, but it equally affects the deciduous as well as the permanent tooth. And type 3 is also autosomal dominant, and it is otherwise known as the Brandywine type. Okay, it is a special localized type which was discovered in a Brandywine which is isolated in Maryland. Okay, so these are the three different types according to Shield classification. So I repeat, dentinogenesis imperfecta, otherwise known as hereditary opalescent dentine. So according to Shield classification, there are three types. Type 1 is primarily affecting the deciduous tooth. Type 2, both the deciduous and the permanent tooth are equally affected. And type 3 is the Brandywine type. Now when we look into the revised classification, so the revised classification, dentinogenesis imperfecta is just classified into two types, type 1 and type 2. In revised classification from Shield classification, they are again summarized into two classification. Okay, dentinogenesis type 1 and type 2. So revised classification, type 1 is actually type 2 of Shield classification. Okay, so the one which affects both the deciduous and the primary teeth. Okay, so that belongs to dentinogenesis imperfecta type 1 in revised classification. Okay, and second type, okay, second type is actually type 3 of the Shield classification, Brandywine type. So Brandywine type is actually belonging to type 2 here in case of a revised classification. So you got the difference. Revised classification, we have only two types of dentinogenesis imperfecta, but in Shield classification we have three types. Type 2 in Shield classification is actually type 1 of revised classification, and type 3 of Shield classification is type 2 of revised classification. Okay, so that is the difference. Now in dentinogenesis imperfecta, how does it look like? Okay, so the color is gray to brownish violet in color, gray to brownish violet in color in case of dentinogenesis imperfecta, and there is fracturing of the enamel. So these 2 points are very, very important because practical oriented question can come. So in practical oriented question, the dentine, it will be like a 4-year-old child. So one of the years it was asked like this. Okay, a 4-year-old child, there is no effect on the primary tooth. There was a effect on the grayish appearance of the permanent tooth alone, and there is fracturing away of the enamel, and there is a secondary dentine formation. And there is also abnormal or rapid attrition of dentine and abnormal dentino-enamel junction. So there is excessive constriction of cemento-enamel junction, tulip or that of bell-shaped crown can be seen. So all this belongs to which type of clinical condition? It belongs to actually what? Dentinogenesis imperfecta. So they can give you all the options, all the features in the question, and they can ask you what does it belong to. Okay, so that is one type of question they can ask. So in case of dentinogenesis imperfecta, the color is actually gray to brownish violet in color or gray brownish color, and they can be fracturing of enamel is very visible. Okay, and abnormal DEJ is another important point. Okay, and what is the shape of the crown? Tulip or bell shaped crown. Now another important point is what is the radiological feature of dentinogenesis imperfecta. Okay, so dentinogenesis imperfecta type 2, okay, that is Shield type 3 is actually known as shell teeth. That is very, very important MCQ. Dentinogenesis imperfecta type 2, that is a revised classification type 2. When it comes to Shield classification, it is type 3, that is Brandywine type, is actually called as the shell teeth in dentinogenesis imperfecta. Okay, so that point is very, very important. So here the enamel will be normal, whereas dentine is extremely thin and the pulp chamber and root canals are extremely larger in size. So it appears like a shell. That is why it is called as a shell tooth. Okay, clear? Coming on to next important MCQ, that is dentine dysplasia. So in dentine dysplasia, we have two types again. Type 1 is radicular dentine dysplasia and type 2 is coronal dentine dysplasia. Okay, so this one is also an autosomal dominant, just like dentinogenesis imperfecta. Dentine dysplasia is also an autosomal dominant disorder. Okay, and it affects mainly type 1 is unknown gene and type 2 is caused by dentine sialyl-phosphoprotein gene. Okay, same gene same as that of dentinogenesis imperfecta. In case of dentinogenesis imperfecta also, DSPP is the gene involved. Okay, now in case of dentine dysplasia, clinical feature is very important. Okay, type 1, that is radicular dentine dysplasia, is otherwise known as rootless teeth. Radicular dentine dysplasia is otherwise known as rootless teeth. So see the picture, there only a very small development of the root is there. Okay, shortened root length is visible, so that is why it is called as rootless teeth. Okay, that is type 1. So that can be a very important MCQ question. So which type of dentine dysplasia is actually radicular dentine dysplasia or rootless teeth? It is actually type 1, not type 2. Type 2 is coronal here. Now coming on to coronal dentine dysplasia, here both the dentitions are affected and also the root length will be normal in this particular case. The crown is affected here. So in this case, crown is commonly affected and you can see a very small tooth size. Okay, crown size will be very small and root will be normal in this particular case. Okay, so in coronal dentine dysplasia, and that is actually type 2 dentine dysplasia. Remember that point, very, very important. Coming on to the next important MCQ, that is regional odontodysplasia. So regional odontodysplasia, the tooth is actually appearance as ghost teeth. The teeth is known as ghost teeth. So that is a very important MCQ. Ghost teeth is actually belonging to which condition? It is regional odontodysplasia. So here it is a localized. Okay, only 1 or 2 teeth might be like a ghost teeth. So it is localized, non-hereditary. Okay, it is not hereditary, non-hereditary. So in case of dentine dysplasia as well as in case of dentinogenesis imperfecta, it is hereditary because the gene affected is dentine phosphoprotein. So here regional odontodysplasia, it is non-hereditary, but it is a developmental abnormality of teeth with extensive adverse effects on the formation of enamel, dentine and pulp. So that point is very, very important. So there is adverse effects on formation of enamel, dentine and pulp. That is why the ghost teeth appearance. So the clinical picture is shown in that figure. Okay, so regional odontodysplasia, we can see the ghost teeth. Now yet another important MCQ is which are the conditions associated with that of regional odontodysplasia. So there are features which are associated with regional odontodysplasia, that are ectodermal dysplasia, epidermal nevi, hypophosphatasia, hydrocephalus, ipsilateral facial hypoplasia, neurofibromatosis, orbital coloboma, RH factor incompatibility as well as vascular nevi. So these are the conditions associated with that of regional odontodysplasia. So just remember few points from this. So you should remember ectodermal dysplasia, neurofibromatosis. Okay, so these are hypophosphatasia, etc. Just remember because these are given in the options usually. Okay, so regional odontodysplasia associated with these conditions. So regional odontodysplasia, how does the appearance come under radiograph? So as we know, it is a radiographic appearance is actually a ghost appearance. So why does it happen? Because we have a very thin enamel and dentine. So see in the radiograph you can see that molar teeth. Okay, so just look into that molar teeth. There is a very thin enamel and dentine. There is a large pulp chamber. So what happens? There will be a decreased radiodensity. So that is why it gives like a ghost tooth appearance. So that is why that radio appearance will be a ghost teeth appearance. Okay, so there is lack of contrast between enamel and dentine. We are not able to make out which is enamel, which is dentine. So it appears like a larger figure. Okay, so that is why that ghost appearance. So this is the radiographical picture of a ghost teeth. Okay, in a regional odontodysplasia. Coming on to last portion, that is developmental disturbances in the eruption of teeth. Okay. Now what is the difference between an embedded and an impacted tooth? Okay, so embedded teeth means it's unerupted usually because of the lack of eruptive force. There is no eruptive force and the tooth is not erupted. Okay, unerupted. So that is why it is called as a embedded teeth. But what is a impacted teeth? Impacted teeth means it is prevented from eruption by some physical barrier. Okay, so it wants to erupt. Okay, or it sometimes might be a partially erupted tooth and there is some factor, physical barrier, which is preventing it from complete eruption. So such a tooth is called as a impacted tooth. But in case of embedded tooth, it doesn't have a eruptive force at all. Okay, it doesn't erupt at all. It lacks the eruptive force and it is completely unerupted. So that is the difference between an embedded and an impacted tooth. Okay, so which are the tooth which are commonly impacted? These are maxillary and mandibular third molars. Okay, so the third molars are the ones which are usually impacted or embedded because then there might be no eruptive force, or there might be lack of space for the eruption. Okay, and the angulation also might be different, or there might be some eruptive physical barrier. Okay, so that is why maxillary and mandibular third molar are the most commonly impacted tooth, and next one is maxillary canine, and lastly the premolar. So that sequence of order is very important. First one belongs to third molar, second belongs to maxillary canine. Okay, second most impacted tooth is maxillary canine. Okay, and thirdly premolar, and lastly supernumerary tooth. Okay, so that's the difference between an embedded and an impacted tooth. So depending upon the angulation in which the impacted tooth is lying in the alveolar bone, based on that what we can classify, they are classified into mesioangular impaction, distoangular impaction. Okay, so mesioangular impaction is the more commonly found impacted tooth. So look into the first picture, how is it impacted? The tooth, the third molar tooth, the mandibular third molar tooth is actually impacted in a mesioangular position. Okay, so that is why it's a mesioangular impaction, and that is the most commonly found impaction type. Second one is distoangular impaction. Look into the configuration of the third molar, how it is lying in that alveolar bone. It is distoangularly located. Okay, so that is the difference. Coming on to the next two variants of impaction type, that is vertical impaction. So look into the picture, how does the third molar lie in that particular case compared to that of the second molar? It is vertically impacted to that of the second molar, okay, in relation to second molar. So that is why it is prevented by impingement on the distal surface of second molar or the anterior border of the ramus. Okay, clear? So that is vertical impaction. And the last one is horizontal impaction. It is horizontally impacted and it is exerting its force on the roots, distal roots of the second molar. So that is the different types of impaction. Mesioangular is the most commonly found impaction type. Then we have the distoangular impaction, vertical and the horizontal impactions. Coming on to another important MCQ, that is what is a eruption sequestrum. So look into that picture in that right mandibular third molar position. Okay, mandibular, so that is 4-8 position. So look into that position. Here you can see a tiny irregular bony spicule. In 4-8 position you can see a tiny irregular bony spicule overlying the crown of an erupting permanent molar. So there is a erupting permanent molar, third molar 4-8. So on top of that you can see a irregular bony spicule. So that is called as a eruption sequestrum. Okay, so that is the eruption sequestrum. So you can see a tiny irregular bony spicule overlying the crown of erupting permanent molar in case of a eruption sequestrum. Coming on to the last portion of part 2, that is developmental disturbances, the last topic, that is ankylosed deciduous teeth. Okay, so these are otherwise called as submerged tooth. So look into that clinical picture, you can see the tooth is actually ankylosed to the underlying bone. Okay, it is ankylosed to the underlying bone, so this prevents it from that of the exfoliation. So the deciduous tooth is actually wants to exfoliate, but it is being held on by that of the bone. Okay, so that is why ankylosed deciduous tooth happens. Okay, and this will in turn affect what? This will in turn affect the eruption of underlying permanent tooth. So that is the difference. So how do you make out clinically, how do you make out the ankylosis? So when you do a tendron percussion, okay, TOP with a mouth mirror, okay, what happens? You can hear a solid sound. In case of a ankylous tooth, you can hear a solid sound because it is ankylous to the underlying bone. So normally we have to hear a dull cushion sound on tapping on the tooth, okay, with a mouth mirror on percussing, but in case of ankylosed tooth we can see a solid sound. Okay, so that is a difference. And there will be lack of mobility also even with the resorbed roots because it is ankylosed to the underlying alveolar bone, and there will be lack of eruption of the underlying permanent tooth. So that is otherwise known as a submerged tooth. Ankylosed deciduous tooth is otherwise known as a submerged tooth. So these are the important points. So guys, keep learning, keep revising. That is very, very important because only then we can retain and we can reproduce in the exams. So always relate with the pictures and study. So this will help you to remember very easily. Okay, so guys, thank you. Keep revising, keep learning. Success will surely follow. Okay, thank you guys.